This week I'm in Alnwick, not visiting the castle, but instead I'm headed into Hulne Park, once the hunting grounds of the Percy family, the Dukes of Northumberland. At the entrance of the park is the site where William the Lion, King of Scotland, was famously captured during his siege of Alnwick in 1174. Now I found in an old book an interesting little folktale about a hidden cave somewhere in the park, and so I was keen to investigate and see this place for myself. Alnwick is a place that I'm very familiar with, but I'd never actually visited this huge park before. There are 3 different marked walking routes, so if you ever find yourself here and want to follow the trail I'm taking you on in this video, you need to follow the yellow arrows. I was enjoying the fresh air and thinking about what the park would have looked like centuries ago when the Percys would hunt deer and boar through the trees. The current Duke still goes shooting here, I'm told. A lot of things change, but it seems some things stay the same. The first point of interest I came across was Brisley Tower, built in 1781 by the then Duke of Northumberland for his recently deceased wife, Elizabeth Percy. It was designed by Scottish architect Robert Adam and built by a local mason named Matthew Mills. It stands at 26 metres and provides an impressive view across the park, or at least it would if it was open. What's different about this video compared to my usual work is that I went into today's filming quite blind. I only knew about the story involving the cave, which is coming soon, so everything else that I encounter is completely unplanned and a bit of a surprise to me. It's enjoyable going out like this though, and not knowing what you'll come across next. Within about 5 minutes, I came across the recently constructed private burial ground for the Percy family. It was built here in 2007, so it's empty, but I was instantly attracted to the iron gates, built by the local blacksmith Stephen Lunn. He created the popular gates at the Alnwick Gardens, which a lot of people might have seen, so it was nice to be able to find some of his lesser known work. Directly opposite the walled burial ground is the stone seat and a standing stone. My guess is that this spot was and is a favourite of the Percy family, which might explain why they've built their burial ground here. Great views out across Northumberland from this spot. So what's the folklore of this area? What is the tale involving the cave? Well, the story goes that there were 3 robbers that had taken a substantial amount of loot at some point in the 1700s. I couldn't tell you who they were or who they stole from, but their friendship seemed very fragile indeed. While on the run with all the treasure they'd stolen, they took refuge in this area, finding a cave known as the Year Aad Hole, or 9-year-old hole. It's guarded by a strange and mysterious stone figure, quite an unnerving character. So the 3 men come here, the 9-year Aad Hole. I don't know why it's called that, another name lost to time I guess, but they come here. There's no public footpath obviously back in the day, back in the 1700s, so this is quite a secret and secure spot for them.
Now, while one of the men went into Alnwick town to get some food for the 3 men, 2 of the men that were left decided that it was time to dig a hole to bury the treasure in so that no one else could find it. And while they were digging, one of them says to the other one, "You know, all this treasure divided by 3 men is a lot of money, but all this treasure divided by 2 men is a lot more." They decided that it would be best if they killed the man who had gone to get the food in Alnwick. So they plotted to murder him when he returned.
The man that suggested this plan waited inside the cave, while the other waited outside for the 3rd robber to return. After a few hours he was back and carried a bag of supplies. No sooner had he placed the bag down than his supposed friend had plunged a knife deep into his chest. The murderer was in shock at what he'd done, but pleased that his share of the spoils had increased. He entered the cave to inform his friend that the deed was done, only for the robber that came up with the plan to emerge from the darkness and then stab him. Wanting to cover his tracks, he then dragged both their bodies into a bog a few minutes' walk from the cave.
So, with his 2 accomplices dead outside, the one surviving robber sits down, ready to enjoy his feast that one of his old mates brought back from Alnwick. Gets a fire going in front of him. It's getting quite late and dark now, and he takes a nice looking loaf of bread out of the basket, has a big bite into it. Within moments, the one surviving robber lies dead within the cave. The man who had gone to Alnwick had anticipated a bit of foul play, or perhaps he just wanted all the treasure for himself. In any case, he'd poisoned the food, ready for the other 2 men to have a bite, so that he could go off with all the treasure.
None of the robbers would ever be able to spend their gold, and its location was lost forever.
So you might be wondering, what is the relevance of this statue to the story? This monk, or hermit, or, I don't know, wizard? Why is he here? Well, I'm not sure, and to be honest, no one else is really sure either. It appeared here in the 1700s at some point. I'm not sure who by, I'm not sure who made it or who brought it here, but people have always said that he's acted as a sort of guardian for the cave. Perhaps he's the only one that knows where the treasure's buried. A bit spooky in any case.
The day was still young and I was curious to find out more about this statue. All references I could find about him, not that there were many, refer to him as a hermit, which he most definitely is these days, but originally I think he was a monk or friar. On my walk up to the cave, I noticed the ruins of an old abbey or priory, shown here on the map. I thought that if I was going to get any answers about this statue, then it was probably going to be here. This is Hulne Priory, founded in 1240 by Carmelites. Its close proximity to the border explains why it's built like a solid fortification, with thick walls and a 15th century peel tower. The place looked somewhat familiar to me, and I realised that this priory had been the filming location for Maid Marian's home in the 1991 film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The place was incredibly peaceful and welcoming, a sharp contrast to the eerie feeling up at that cave. It still amazes me that despite how well you think you know your own area, there are always new places to find and explore. I looked at the fireplaces, the doorways, the spaces that were once rooms centuries ago. You can't help but imagine the people that lived here. What secrets does this place hold? My eye was then caught by a statue of a monk, unmistakably made by the same person that had made the hermit at the cave. He even had the same small bag on his belt as well. Then I spotted 2 more monks by one of the doors built into the walls. We've cracked the case of where the hermit came from. These statues had been added here in the 1700s. And while I was here, I remembered that the famous English landscape architect, Lancelot Capability Brown, who was a Northumbrian as well, he actually worked on the grounds of Alnwick and the lands owned by the Duke in the second half of the 18th century. If I had to guess, I'd say that it was probably him that added these statues. So now only one question remains. Why was that hermit statue taken all the way up to the cave? A big thanks to the continued support of my patrons who make all this possible, and much appreciation to new patrons, Sam, Elizabeth, Karen, Victoria, Glennie and Dan Davies, who many will no doubt know from the huge channel Dan Davies History.